People make an institution. And first I want to pay tribute to the students, faculty, and staff who've made this department an excellent place of learning. I have been here for 49 years of the 50-year life of the department. And there are many persons I could mention who played an important role at different times in building it. Fortunately, the history of the department that was launched early today takes care of much of that. So even though I do not mention many names, that does not mean that I'm unaware of the vital role of literally hundreds of people. We should all be proud of the students, teachers, and staff we've had in the department, and many are here today. I will leave it to you to build your own pantheon of the people who meant something to you when you were at York, and still mean much to you. That is the beauty of memory. You remember and appreciate exceptional people in your educational life. Over the generations, I'm sure that the names that are in my mind will overlap to some degree at least with names in your minds. Geography is a very old subject, and in the 1960s, when this department was founded, some deeply entrenched ideas were brought into organizing the curriculum. This was especially apparent because both of the two founding geographers were concerned with the philosophy of geography, and one at least with the history of the subject. The two geographers, of course, were George Tatum and Hans Carroll. They were complex men, and I will mention a few characteristics of each that affected the development of geography at York. Tatum believed strongly that regional geography was the epitome of the subject, that geography should not be restrictive in what it studies. The highest liberal ideals were important, and that geographical teaching should impart them. In many ways, he embodied what was considered important in geography in the first half of the 20th century, together, however, with complete openness to new concepts. His acute mind was wide-ranging. He was always looking for new information. This could cause problems for others. On my PhD written at comprehensives at the University of Toronto, I could not answer most of his questions. For instance, he asked a question on particular limestone features in the Carpathian Mountains in Central Europe. I'd never heard of these formations. After the exam, I asked him, "Why'd ask this?" "John," he said, "you have the reputation of reading widely. When I was a student, we made a field trip to the Carpathians and visited these formations, and I've always wanted to know more about them." I thought you might help me. Well, I couldn't. That anecdote also indicates something of the individualistic approach to graduate studies in Canada in the 1950s. Professor Carroll was a forceful man of strong conviction, believed in structure and tight organization. As in a curriculum. In the formality of the European academic world, he's been somewhat of a radical in geography. He quickly made use of central place theory introduced by Walter Kostaller, whom he knew. As a German geographer explained to me years after Hans's death, his way was blocked in status-conscious Central European geography, so he came to the United States and ultimately York. Here he was eager to introduce the new geography involving quantitative methods that was being developed at Northwestern University and Chicago. Because of these men, one indirectly, the other directly, there was an openness to new ideas at York, and we did not have some of the contentions that other departments experienced as the discipline was being transformed after World War II. Let me then turn to some thoughts on geography's first 50 years at York. I suppose that every half-century through the 4.6 billion years that Earth has existed would appear to be significant had anyone been there to observe it. Part of that would be sheer egoism, of which there is no shortage in humans. But on this planet, there have been truly periods of rapid, significant change and of true catastrophe. I don't have to tell this group that in the past 20 years research has shown that momentous physical changes are foreseen in the world. It is startling that humans have set in motion physical phenomena that are altering the planet as a home for humans and other forms of life. And I will return to that. The broader point is that our discipline, geography, is linked to an ever-changing Earth, and a geography department must take the world around it into account in what it investigates and teaches. What I propose to do this afternoon is give some thought to what was significant in the world, and especially in Ontario, in the period when the department was founded, and relate that to teaching geography. Then do the same thing in the world today. I will also take some notice of changes that took place within the half-century. First then, why was it important to study geography in the universities in the period of the 1950s-60s when York University was created? The world was still recovering from the Great Depression and World War II. In the prosperous countries, there was industrial expansion, making a fresh demand on basic resources such as Canada possesses. At the same time, the Cold War, the West versus the USSR, was ever present, and there was a great anxiety about atomic and H-bombs and fear of local civic breakdown if there was a nuclear conflict. There was plenitude in some parts of the world, as there was in Canada, but we were very much aware of economic disparities, and there was concern for improving food supplies in the Third World. There was considerable faith in world organizations, such as the United Nations and UNESCO, in alleviating hunger. Worry about the environment was just beginning. Environmental protection agencies were starting in the 1960s, but the great change in awareness came later, and with increasing speed, especially the United Nations Conference on the Environment in Stockholm in 1972. A new Ontario was emerging. The population was still very much British in origin, especially the university student population. Industry was flourishing, and great resource projects were underway, especially the building of the St. Lawrence Seaway. We were very much a consumer society, building roads, extending freeways into cities, buying cars. But in both rural and urban areas, there was a concern about the form Ontario development was taking. Even while the war was on, thought was given to watershed conservation projects in rural Ontario, and after the war, urban planning finally came into its own in the province. A critical and determining fight was the Stop Spadina Expressway struggle of 1969-71. I remember the day Premier William Davis stopped the expressway. In late afternoon of June 3rd, 1971, I was driving home from the annual CAG meeting being held in Waterloo when Davis's decision was announced on the radio, and I quote his words: "Cities were built for people and not cars." Very few had expected this bombshell from Davis, and it changed the face of Toronto. Much rethinking was going on about society, and there was a willingness to spend money. This often happens after wars. It is a time of reassessment and possible change. Reforms came in education. In the schools, new textbooks were commissioned. It is unbelievable, for instance, that the same Ontario public school text in geography was prescribed from 1922 to 1948, with only minor changes such as population figures and photographs in the letterpress. The Type A Specialist Teacher Certificate was introduced in high schools for those holding honors degrees. This proved important in upgrading geography instruction, and there was a realization there was a need for expansion in universities, and that is how York and other new Ontario universities came into being. Other great transformations were occurring. In the United States, the blacks were fighting for equality. Here in Canada, there was a quiet revolution in Quebec. I first experienced this personally in 1956, meeting a filmmaker in Montreal, a friend of my wife's. On what was a casual, friendly occasion, to my astonishment, he was curt and unexpectedly dismissive whenever Canada was mentioned. At the time I was perplexed, but a few years later I realized that it had been a precursor of what was to come. Artists always lead the way, and sometimes civil servants. In the early 1960s, when I was teaching in Manitoba, senior civil servants I had got to know came back from provincial federal conferences, impressed and buzzing about the high quality of the Quebec delegates and awestruck by how assertive they were. It was a revolution indeed. That is the world in which geography teaching was started at York in 1960 by George Tatham. Right from the beginning, geography was accepted readily at York, Tatham being one of the very first appointments. President Murray Ross wanted to introduce interdisciplinary work, and Tatham was a natural for that. George, however, was committed to creating the university so that he left the building of the department to others. That was done in 1962 by Hans Carroll, and much, of course, centered on the geography curriculum. A curriculum is the set of courses offered, and a prime educational task of a university department is to carefully work out what's important in the discipline and is to be taught. In basic structure, the York curriculum was similar to that of other departments of the time, teaching physical, human, and regional geography, except that Carroll made a conscious decision to concentrate on human geography. One reason for this focus was that a new Ontario was being shaped around us. It would be an exciting thing to study and teach. It was also done in a spirit that other Ontario departments would develop their own concentrations. Some of that happened, but not in a coordinated way. Departments are living things and follow the thrust of those teaching there, and also what has to be taught as the discipline and the world evolve. Ontario geography departments in the 1950s-60s, including this department, as it grew, had a number of educational goals related to what was happening around them. First, there was a need for good geography teachers in the schools, where it was becoming an important subject, including more geography options in high school. Many of our graduates went into teaching where they've made an outstanding mark. Second, there's a need to prepare students to go into planning. There's evidence of this in our course titles of the time, because the word planning was attached to our rural and urban courses. It was assumed that some students would go into planning schools. At York, the Faculty of Environmental Studies was established in 1968. It was highly appreciated that this department was supportive. Third, basically, however, we regarded ourselves as a liberal arts and science subject. There's an innate interest in the world we live in, and our objective was to teach students to think clearly, critically, in an informed way about that world. There's no surprise about the kinds of courses offered at York. You know them well. They were the conventional courses that are developed in geography departments in universities in the late 19th century and for the first half of the 20th in Europe and North America. The range of courses offered in the 1950s and 60s was not large because departments were small. Courses on physical, economic, and political geography have been long accepted as part of a university geography curriculum, but it may surprise you to learn that urban geography was just emerging as a specialization after World War II. I experienced that as a student in 1951 and 52. Other changes were blowing through geography in the 1950s and 60s. The first hints of quantitative methods were there. Models were there, and Edward Ackerman was emphasizing processes that produced geographic change. All these influences affected our department. Regional geography was not forgotten, but was steadily losing its once strong position in the curriculum. Its former eminence, I think, stems from the 19th century, a time of great geographical scientific investigation in different parts of the world and expansion of world commerce. The world was viewed as one. It was assumed that geography students should have knowledge of all parts of it. At one time, departments felt a responsibility to offer courses on every continent. This view was fading at the time York was established. A course on Canada was offered because students would be able to acquire a good knowledge of their own country. And other regional courses were offered where there was expertise. The department was also very much aware that teaching geography of different parts of the world is a very important part of the public school curriculum. And to have good teaching of regional geography in the schools, you have to have good instruction in the university. Graduate work in geography was done in a few Canadian universities in the 1940s and 50s, and I am a product of that era. But the emphasis in departments was on doing a very thorough honors degree, not on the graduate program. Apart from a couple of seminars, you were left alone to do your thesis. But in the 1960s, at the time that York was founded, the American graduate school model was introduced into Ontario, of more courses and more structure in the program. And in 1967, within 5 years of the founding of the department, the geography graduate program was approved by York Senate. As it happens, our very first student is here today, Pat Mooney, came in 1967. Where are you, Pat? Stand up, please. Come on. There you are. And a hand for Pat. Let us now leave the 1960s and move forward. Over the 4 decades, from 1970 until today, many factors affected geography and produced the present department. This was a gradual transition. Existing faculty adopt new ideas as advances take place in their fields, and new appointments bring fresh approaches. Over the 40 years, a few key factors are readily identified. First, a very apparent change is the introduction of quantitative methods, the computer, geomatics, field experiments, and the internet. The last includes easy access to information, greater speed in communicating, and increased facility in collaborative research. Second, a much greater emphasis on process and explanation, making use of theory, models, and archives, for instance. Third, increased emphasis on research and much more specialization. Fourth, geography became more open to developments in related science, social science, and humanities disciplines. An important point is that the department accepted these changes easily. Hans Carroll, in establishing the department, sought out geographers who knew the new methods. Also, York's spirit of interdisciplinary teaching was helpful in crossing disciplines. In this period of transition, even while all these new approaches were being assimilated, the department rethought whether it was fulfilling its wider educational responsibilities, that of explaining to our students the world as it exists. My evidence is the introduction of a new first-year course, and especially the rationale for giving it a place in the curriculum alongside the existing physical and human foundation courses. In the late 1970s, it had become evident that the introductory human geography course was not suited to many non-geography majors who were entering the course out of a general interest in learning about the world they lived in. The department minutes reveal a faculty that was willing to listen to student voices and recalibrate the curriculum to fulfill this educational need. In the fall term of 1979, the undergraduate program committee, Don Freeman, coordinator, Conor Heidenreich, John Marshall, Ryan Massam. I don't know the student who was on that committee. He or she may be here. If so, let me know after this lecture. This committee proposed to, and I quote, create a new course of more general interest, which is suitable for first-year students, non-geographers as well as geography students. The rationale for the new course was very carefully spelled out because one is in very delicate territory when you restructure first-year courses. It was to be, and I quote again, an interesting, problem-oriented course which focuses on contemporary worldwide problems, which geographers have examined, into the study of which they've made contributions. The subject matter that was suggested included, and don't forget, this is 1978, world population problems, hunger, disease, world food supply, the ocean as food resource, world energy problems, development problems in the third world, deteriorating environments, urbanization, ideologies and the world political order, mass migration at a world scale, others. The broad reasons for proposing the course were in part pedagogical, and again I quote, "A problem-oriented course such as this would introduce students to geographical thinking in a more painless and probably more interesting manner than the more conceptually oriented existing introductory courses and most upper-level courses." Then the rationale, that is the defense, focuses on specific issues. At present, no course deals with geographical problems at that scale. Some of us have noticed that many students have a concern for those problems and expect that geographers do as well. The course will have student interest. Large-scale problems are by nature interdisciplinary, and the expertise of both physical and human geographers can be utilized, and physical geographers should teach the physical-environmental problems. Other geography departments are doing this. The department approved the course, although there were votes against it, and it first appeared in the 1979-80 calendar as Introduction to World Geography. It started as a first-year course, was placed briefly in second year, and then moved back to first year, where it remains today, name unchanged. I single out that first-year course because it is intended to convey what geography has to say about the state of the world, particularly to students who are not geography majors. Indeed, this may be the only course they may take in university. In the late 1950s, I taught an equivalent course in Manitoba, although it was not as problem-oriented. I always felt badly about the quality of my teaching in that course, because there's only a lecture ahead of my students and always well beyond the limits of my expertise. You have to dig out content and think about what's vital about the selected regions and problems in the world and present it to students in fresh ways. And the information has to be accurate. Years later, to my astonishment, I learned that the impact could be remarkable. Former students I met told me that something had remained from those classes that served as baselines in interpreting particular world events or context for understanding particular cultures. Such responses were more a credit to the subject and the dynamic spatial interpretation that geography provides than my feeble efforts to find contemporary source material in those days before the internet and the New York Times online. This brings me to the present. First, I want to suggest a few significant ways in which the world has changed before our eyes in the last half-century. It is not so much that new forces emerged in the last 50 years, as that processes set in motion after the Renaissance and during the 19th century Industrial Revolution have brought about conditions that cause great problems for humankind. This is the new world we are facing as geographers. I will be brief in referring to significant new conditions that lie behind current geographical issues and increasingly affect the world that geographers study and teach. First, energy and water. It has finally sunk in that these resources are finite and that consuming fossil fuels is causing irrevocable damage to the earth. Second, migration. Sometimes catastrophic cultural shocks result as the European impacts on South American indigenous cultures demonstrate. Somewhat to our surprise, Canada set a significant example to the world in its successful multiculturalism, and that only emerged, let us not forget, after World War II. Before that, it was a ruthless assimilation. I grew up in that school system. Third, globalization. It has been with us a long time. There's a recent inversion of industrialization across the world, and profound adaptations are required. Fourth, geopolitical power. Fundamental shifts have occurred since the fall of the Berlin Wall, with resulting changes in world power relations, especially the rise of Asia. Fifth, environmental protection. Conservation has deep roots, but protecting the environment is recognized to be of increasing importance. Sixth, there's continuing urban expansion. At the same time, we have to keep cities livable and stimulating centers of civilization. Many of the above forces connect to a current critical issue, climate warming caused by humans. It really is an earth-shaking 180-degree change from the environmental determinism that plagued geography only 75 years ago. We are now changing nature with outcomes we don't yet know. Understandably, it concentrates our geographical minds and is starting to set in motion policy shifts in human affairs, but sadly, at a glacial pace. Those 6 factors emphasize sharply the vitality and urgency of our subject. We, in geography, are in the midst of a rapidly changing world that has to be investigated. And there is the reason for the title of this talk. For geographers, there always is a new world. Let us now turn to the department and examine what has happened in the classroom and teaching this new world. The first thing to note is a great increase in the number of courses offered. In large part, this is because of the introduction of half courses. In first year, there are still full courses where students are reintroduced to geography after high school. But after that, half courses predominate. In some ways, however, the number of courses is deceptive. Subfields formerly included as part of a full course now may be taught in one term under their own title to provide flexibility. Another characteristic is that there's a closer link to what is done in other disciplines. This is not only because of research developments in geography, but because of similar developments in other disciplines. The stimulation has been mutual. All you need to do is look at the fundamental changes that have taken place in sociology, political science, and anthropology. Let me give an example. In the introductory human geography courses of the early and mid-20th century, stemming from the days of Ratzel, there was a heavy leaning on early anthropology. Then modern anthropology, economics, sociology, and political science came along. Though Karl Sauer had long used the idea of culture in his human geography, there has been renewed and sophisticated geographical interest in the concept of culture. There's been renewed, and also concepts of state power, the nature of community, the identity of groups, economic well-being, and government policy. The same is true in physical geography. There's been increased emphasis on process and instrumentation, corresponding to what emerged in the related earth science subjects. These changes would not have happened so naturally if Ontario universities over the past 50 years had not so strongly promoted research and the growth of graduate programs intimately related to such research. Research specialization in geography has existed a long time, but has become much more prominent. This research stimulus is reflected as well in the content of undergraduate courses, as it should be. In a way, then, this is a return to what was envisaged at the founding of the department. that it would specialize in certain areas of geography, though of course we could not at that time be clairvoyant and envisage what directions that specialization would take. What then does the York curriculum look like today? The department wisely has brought about order out of an amazing array of courses by classifying them into themes or areas of concentration, so as to orient students and help them make coherent course selections. This started in the 1990s in groupings such as social and economic space, landscape, culture and region, and human-environment relations were introduced. Further revisions continued with long descriptions of each theme provided in the calendar. Because the current list of themes will be new to many alumni, I will list them as they appear in the present calendar. This is how they're listed. First, the city. Second, globalization, environment, and development. Third, production and the politics of difference. Fourth, state, empire, and power. Fifth, extreme environments. Sixth, biophysical processes. Seventh, geoinformatics, image analysis and computing of various kinds. It speaks well of geography, as it is developed at York in the last generation, that the areas of concentration in the department fit in very well with the problems the world is facing today that I enumerated earlier. The department curriculum has the breadth of courses to cover the world issues I identified. Some problems are studied directly, others can be easily addressed as needed. The department has also, in the past decade, adopted critical human geography as an approach that it wants to emphasize. Not defined explicitly in the calendar, it is implicit in the descriptions of the themes. In those statements, critical human geography is presented as a close scrutiny of the thought and power behind the spatial and social differences that geographers study. This kind of thought is part of a deep-seated university tradition in critical thinking. It is congruent with the biblical passage, "The truth shall make you free," a motto of a number of liberal arts and sciences institutions in various parts of the globe. Frank is grinning, Victoria College has it, Johns Hopkins has it, some German universities have it, it's in New Zealand and so on, it's worldwide. In short, the knowledge gained in university also entails obligations and responsibilities in helping make a better world. Our curriculum also presents some challenges. An element of our subject that has faded farther and farther into the background is the part that seeks to integrate all the elements of a region, physical and human, and provide understanding of that area, both its identities and its relationships to the world. That synthesis involves scholarship and art, and also time to draw relationships together effectively. It was the holy grail to many geographers of the 1950s, and I'm one of those. To my surprise, as I prepared this talk, the theme of regional geography turned in my hand and came increasingly into the foreground. Why is that? When we think about the state of the world today and the economic and social problems we confront, it is regional study at the continental scale that comes to the fore and stares us in the face. We must not turn away from that task, nor can we be half-hearted in approach. We have the arsenal in what has been accomplished in systematic geography in the past half-century to do this thinking and teaching in fresh, thoughtful, and exciting ways. It is at the continental scale in regional geography that major world problems can be effectively analyzed in a global context. This need is made even greater by the modern media and the instant conveyance of information from all parts of the globe, and the need to put it in perspective. Geography does this as no other subject, not current affairs, but deep context. There still are a few regional geography courses at York that attempt this. I'm always optimistic about the future of regional geography. People naturally want to learn what the world is like in its full complexity, and they need that information. For example, a regional geography course of Europe would be useful because of what has been happening on that continent over the past half-century. There have been various efforts to integrate an extraordinarily variegated continent in the face of ethnic prejudice, wars, and lack of economic discipline. The world is interdependent. What happens there, as in Asia, affects us in Canada. Other intriguing prospects can be seen in our geography curriculum. In recent calendars, you'll find broad courses with familiar names such as cultural, political, historical, and social listed as not offered or to be announced. In the excitement of mounting new specialized courses, such mother courses are occasionally left listed as symbols only. This is not only true of York, but of geography in other universities. Such course listings are not tombstones of a bygone era. On the contrary, they are sentinels of great promise. When the fundamental roles of the arts and sciences is reflective inquiry, those courses offer great possibilities to think afresh what has been accomplished in the past 25 years in those broad fields of geographical investigation, to think anew on the best that has been thought and written in those fields. There's a need for such original, imaginative, integrative thinking to bring separate threads of our various subfields together, to examine and reflect on what is worth thinking about in those basic elements of our subject, thus adding to what we teach. I can't resist two didactic notes. First, what happened to the teaching of cartography, both as map design and as geographical intellectual history, where it is increasingly coming to the fore? Whether the creative thought behind cartography begins with pencil and paper, or from the most modern electronic imaging, it remains a basic language of our subject. We must not lose it. It is a language used by many, but we geographers are prime guardians of it as a creative research tool. Moreover, early in the life of this university, ours is a department and faculty that nurtured Bernie Gutzel's cartographic publications, which gained international luster for this institution under his astute, innovative editorial rule, and may I say, almost mystical financial steering. And of course, Cartographica remains one of the world's premier cartographic journals, though published elsewhere. Second, perhaps consideration should be given to an undergraduate course on the wholeness of geography, that is, geographical thought. I took George Tatum's graduate course on the history of geographical thought, 3 seminar hours a week for 2 terms, a great course. But the most brilliant lectures I ever had in university were given by George when he condensed that seminar into lectures in only 4 to 6 weeks to second-year honors undergrads. It was exhausting, but a tour de force in effective teaching, and a crucial guide to the discipline for students near the beginning of their studies in geography. As I conclude, let me return to why geography is so important in education. We teach and live in a democracy where geographically informed, thoughtful citizens are essential. Geography is a liberal discipline, one that sparks our students to new ideas and thinking. But it is a practical subject as well. Our graduates have an important role as they interact with the general public on vital aspects of the planet. In their everyday lives, geography alumni help provide a broad frame of reference in their outlook on the earth. There will never be an ideal world, but we should not be ignorant about the earth as it exists. There's much waiting to be done. What our subject provides is an educated geographical imagination, to adapt the words of Northrop Frye. And and some final thoughts on the last span of 50 years. Were those of us who are still around from the early days really thinking then that we were building something for the future? That we might look back in 40 years to consider what was accomplished? Absolutely not. We did know that we had a fine tradition of geography in Canada to uphold, wanted to build something truly worthwhile, welcome fresh ideas that were entering geography, do research, and through our subject and our students, contribute to the society in which we lived. We took on those responsibilities joyfully. That much is true. But did we think in terms of what posterity would think? Not at all. We were building the engine as it was running flat out, a favorite phrase of a York colleague in physics. And the reality was trying to cope with everyday teaching, preparing new courses, hectic administrative duties in a new university, and looking ahead at what had to be done tomorrow. Our task was to build something excellent that had educational merit in real time, because the students before us deserved the very best we had to offer. For each and every generation of students, that must be true of a department, and it's true of this department today. Thank you for listening to me.